Hey guys, welcome to Pancreas Pals. Emily here.
And Miriam.
And this week we are talking all things toxic friendships. We're coming in strong. We've been on a little bit of a hiatus. That's not to say Miriam and I have a toxic friendship. It's just to say that life's busy. We're both making moves, doing things. But we haven't forgotten about you, pal. Sorry for the little hiatus.
Exactly. Life just kind of got away from both of us, I think, the past couple of months, but we're still good. We don't have a toxic friendship. And Emily, I want to point out, when you were introducing this episode, you had like the perfect podcast voice.
Oh my God, thank you. 5 years later.
Today
for all the
we're
SpongeBob
talking
fans.
about. It was very soothing to me.
Catch an EP of meditation coming soon. Just kidding. LOL. Could you imagine? I'd interrupt and be like, sorry guys, I have to take a call. Sorry. Okay, I'm getting off topic. Okay, so again, we're talking all things toxic friendship. In that, you might be like, hey, what does that have to do with diabetes? Well, let us tell you, we definitely know quite a few ways. This is not like an episode of us calling out people in our lives or in our past. It's just things that we've seen on social media, things we've seen throughout the years. And honestly, we're running out of ideas on episodes for you guys. So
we've just exhausted everything diabetes related. But no, I think in friendships or relationships in general, there are times where you have to put up boundaries for whatever it is. And I think diabetes specifically, there's a lot of boundaries you have to put up to protect yourself, medically, emotionally, etc. And so I think it does tie in with friendships that aren't serving you, and how does diabetes kind of fit in with that?
Also, I want to say that an idea for this came from a story that we were working on at Prevention Magazine, where I'm the senior editor, and it had a lot of really great tips on how to get out of toxic friendships and what a toxic friendship really is. So shameless plug, go check that out, prevention.com. But I do think that it's important to note before we dive into this that by boundaries, we don't mean physical boundaries. We don't mean literally putting up walls between you and other people, although if that helps, do what you need to do. But we're talking about emotional boundaries, mental boundaries, ways to kind of save your energy, save your emotional strength, and put yourself first. Because if there's anything I've learned in my I'm going to continue telling people I'm in my mid-20s. In my mid-20s, it's that everyone's doing themselves, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But that means I got to do myself too. And by that, I mean put myself first. So that's something that's like really hard for me. And obviously it's taken years of therapy to even realize that's what I do. But I don't know. I just am always the mom of the friend group. But that being said, there's so much more time in your life when you realize that you can put yourself first and meet your needs and be happy and focus on those things that make you happy. So let's delve into getting there, which is by talking toxic friendships.
Yeah.
So
I'm taking it away.
I guess. So let's start off with what a toxic friendship is, Miriam.
What a toxic friendship is. I'm curious, Emily, because you've done the more recent research on this for the article in Prevention Magazine, but I think there isn't a clear-cut definition. I think toxic is really relative, right? And so it's really dependent on what you're comfortable with. But I'd say in general, and you guys know because we've had that episode on toxic positivity, I think, I'm pausing because even the word toxic sort of makes me cringe sometimes, because I think it gets overused at times. Like, oh, that's so toxic, or she's so toxic.
Back when we had our toxic positivity episode, we were like trailblazers. That was kind of before the whole toxic positivity came about in modern day. Miriam was like, you know what? I got to talk about this thing, and it's big in therapy. It's big in mental health. I just learned about it, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I mean, toxic doesn't have to, it's a keyword, it's something that
exactly,
it's a buzzword.
It does get overused at times, but I think in the way we're trying to define it is like something that's no longer serving you, or something not only is it not serving you and adding value to your life, but it's actually removing value. It's making things worse.
I
right?
like to think of it like, sorry to interrupt you, Miriam,
No, go for it.
for a metaphor or an analogy, if you will, I like to think of it as this really, really, really cute dress that you used to obsess over, maybe not obsess over, that, brought, every time you put it on, you were like, damn, I look fine. I'm so glad I bought this dress, what have you. But then maybe a year goes by, maybe a few months go by, you put the dress on and it starts to bring up these questions like, I don't like my butt in this, or, now it's too tight, or, wow, I really wish I didn't spend $200 on this dress. Whatever, as time keeps going on, you find yourself not wearing the dress, you keep putting it back until ultimately you're like, I should donate this dress. Like, it's not bringing me joy. You Marie Kondo that way of life. So that's my little analogy.
I think that's a great analogy, and sometimes where the toxic piece comes in is sort of like before you realize that, before you have that realization of like, oh, this is no longer helpful for me.
Or when you don't realize maybe even that you don't have to stay in a friendship. Yeah. I think that takes, like in high school, or even in college, I should say, the friends I made my freshman year, I definitely had some toxic friendships there. And it never even crossed my mind that like I could be like, I don't really see this relationship continuing. Like that didn't even cross my mind as a little 18-year-old.
Yeah. And I also think it's much harder when you're younger and in different sorts of environments. As an adult, out of college even, I think it's much easier to spend time with the people you want to spend time with. I think if you're in a high school, it's a much smaller environment. You don't, if you're in a group of friends or a circle of friends, it is harder to avoid certain people without feeling alienated or isolated. And so there are times when you can remove yourself or kind of slowly fade out more toxic relationships for you, but sometimes you can't, and then you kind of have to or sometimes you can't easily without having other repercussions. And so there's other ways you can manage that by sort of protecting yourself and supporting yourself so the toxicness doesn't impact you too much.
The toxicity.
Yes,
before we jump into
Emily is the wordsmith, not I.
Oh my God, no. Also, I should note, I did not write or edit that piece. I'm just a big fan of that piece in prevention. I did promote
I'll still give you kudos.
Thanks. I love my team and everyone's hard work. But anyways, I do think before we jump into how to, deal with toxic friendships, let's talk about, and we mentioned this before, like what is toxic friendship, but let's talk about the signs of toxic friendship. They're different for everyone. Obviously, it depends on what your definition of toxic friendship is, but what are some feelings that you would tell maybe your clients or people that you've studied in therapy, that are showing signs of toxic friendships? Like what are
Emily's always putting me on the spot.
She's giving me the death stare right now. I could answer
I
some,
didn't have time
but not
to prep
from
for this. But
not
I'd
from
say
a
in
licensed
general,
perspective.
yes,
Okay.
I'd say in general, signs that you can identify within yourself that maybe there's a relationship or a friendship that's not helpful for you or valuable, adding value to your life is feelings of anxiety, kind of thinking about spending time with someone, or really like feelings of dread, that kind of pit in your stomach of like, ugh, I really don't want to spend time with this person. Or maybe you're, texting with your friends and they're like, oh, so-and-so is coming too. And you kind of get that like ping of anxiety and dread of like, ooh.
And it's not excitement, anxiety. I think that's the big difference.
Yes.
Like, we're talking the kind of anxiety that's not like texting your crush. It's like, my stomach hurts or whatever, however that manifests for you.
Yes, exactly. Or someone who like maybe you feel like is really cool and you do really want to spend time with them, but you find that when you do spend time with them, you don't feel good about yourself. And so by that I mean like your self-esteem feels a little bit lower. They kind of maybe poke a little bit or kind of point things out to you that you end up getting self-conscious or like those,
or you're emotionally exhausted when you come back.
Exhausted after, or you feel like you have to be defensive when you're talking about them or always kind of on alert. These happen from time to time with everyone. We all have our defenses, we all have our triggers where we're kind of going to react in certain ways. But if there are certain people in your life that you feel like this is pretty consistent, like this is how you feel every time you're with them, or consistently enough, you just don't really feel good about yourself and you don't feel good around them, that's sort of a red flag of like, okay, maybe this friendship, again, I hate you keep using the word toxic. Maybe this friendship is toxic, or just maybe this friendship is no longer serving me.
Right. I like them no longer serving me. I think that's the key takeaway.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, toxic sounds good, and it's definitely going to be the name of this podcast episode, but it's more than that. It's
Mm-hmm.
not like just feeling bad or you get in a fight. It's,
Mm-hmm.
you know, when you think of friendships, I like to think of the people I want to fill my house with, fill
Mm-hmm.
my metaphorical house with. I don't want a large gathering these days, but you know, people that I'd see and I'd hug, people I'd see that like make me laugh, make me smile. And as we get older and we're able to figure out who we are more as people, I think it becomes more clear what relationships are no longer serving you. And to waste time on those relationships feels just as bad at the end of the day. I know in college, when I would hang out with some people that I didn't feel great about hanging out with, or that I left feeling not great about myself, I should say, I'd be like, I really wish I got this weekend back. Like, what the hell? Like, why did I just waste all this time and money hanging out with people that I don't feel great at the end of, you know? Think of all the fun times you have with the people in your life that do bring you joy. And maybe it's not even friends, maybe it's siblings, whatever, you know, whatever it is. Think of the people that bring you happiness and, you know, invest in that.
And I always, even the concept of like wasted time, I think in these circumstances, like no time is ever really wasted, because I think these experiences, you learn something, right? You learned like, oh, I don't feel good about this relationship, or it doesn't make me feel good. And I think this kind of ties in with the idea of remembering that we cannot change people, right? We can maybe advocate for ourselves or point out things that feel not helpful, etc., but you cannot change someone's personality. And it's not your job to. You know, what you can do is change how you react to people and what you do in what your role in the relationship dynamic is. And so for a lot of these relationships that feel, again, more toxic, whatever word we're using, that's your role, is you can decide to remove yourself or fade out, you know, and this doesn't have to be a dramatic exit, like, this friendship is no longer serving me, so I'm out, you know, have a nice life. Like, no, it does not need to be this dramatic thing. It just means like kind of a slow fade out, right?
Although if you do have a dramatic story, please slide into our emails or DMs and tell us. We're here for that juicy drama.
We're always here for the juicy stuff, for sure.
We're supporting you, though. It's not unethical.
Exactly. And the reality is there are some people that you might never be able to fully remove yourself from, right? There's some people in your life you can kind of slowly remove yourself from the friendship, and you might really never see or speak to them again. You know, some people are more easily removable like that. But some people you can't, right? You have mutual friends, like you're going to see them, and that's okay, because I think once you've sort of distanced yourself to protect your own needs, when you do see these people in the future, I think it will feel much less jarring, much less, those emotions will be way less intensified, and you'll be in a better position to manage it.
So when it comes to, you know, what does this have to do with diabetes?
Yes.
Let's think of the way our relationships as people with diabetes, diabetics, our relationships with others can be negatively impacted. Maybe not, I'm phrasing this wrong. How we can feel or find toxic friendships that have to do with our diabetes. I think I butchered that, but hopefully everyone understands what I'm trying to say. How do diabetes and toxic friendships happen or go hand in hand?
Intersect, yes. And what are some identifiers for how, you know, what is a toxic dynamic when dealing with your diabetes? And, you know, I was thinking, you know, it's an interesting dynamic, because I think for me, what does not feel helpful, or what kind of gives me like, I don't know, sad emotions, negative emotions, is when I feel like people belittle diabetes, And usually it's for lack of knowledge, I think, not that they're necessarily trying to belittle it. But sometimes the lack of interest in acquiring knowledge about it can feel sort of belittling. But comments you might hear of like, oh, like, you're fine. Oh, yeah, like, my dog has diabetes. Like, it's not a big deal. Or, oh, yeah, you have, like, a pump, so it's fine. You don't really do anything. Or don't you just, like, eat? Like, don't you just, like, make sure you have a juice box and you're fine? You know, comments like that are very belittling of the type 1 diabetes experience, which I think all of us and listeners, you know, all of us living with this can identify with, that those comments can really grind your gears, because it's just like, oh, it's so much more than that, and you kind of want to scream. And listen, I think everybody, a lot of friends who do not have personal experience with type 1 diabetes or don't know anyone else with type 1 diabetes, that might be their assumptions initially, right? We've talked a lot about on this podcast how having to advocate for yourself and educate people when it's like you don't really want to, and it's not necessarily your job to. So I think what's different is that friendships that feel healthy to you and that feel valuable to you, I think you will notice that there is more of an effort to understand you. There is more of an effort to understand your experience. There is more of an effort to respect your needs diabetically. But these more toxic relationships might not make that effort, might not really seem to care, might make you feel like you're a burden somehow by having this extra condition you're carrying around that's like bringing the group down. And so, ding, ding, ding. Like, if anyone is making you feel like you're a burden, that is a red flag. That's one of those key things to kind of keep tabs on, of like, okay, this relationship isn't making me feel good about myself.
Right. And I want to iterate that there's a difference between someone's actions making you feel like a burden and you interpreting things at like an internal, because I know personally one of my biggest things I work on in therapy is, you know, trying not to feel like a burden because of my chronic illness. And it's not necessarily that anyone around me is doing things to make me feel that way. It's more of like an inherent, well, actually, I'm sure like you go back years and any therapist will be like, oh yeah, what was this inciting incident that caused whatever. But these days it's not like, like most people in my life are, you know, actively doing things to, they're not being like, well, it really, like, you know, like, you're diabetic, we can't hang out. But, you know, I think about, and again, back to college, meeting people for the first time, me having to check my blood sugar and, you know, trying to do it under the table, trying to be discreet, and receiving like comments from people around me being like, ew, like, do you have to do that at the table? Or, you know, like, people that I hung out with before and maybe just didn't know I was diabetic, or, you know, just had never experienced it. But that's, you know, those are the other side of that incident, where it's like, you never want to be on the receiving end of that. It's like, first of all, screw you. I'm saving my life every damn day. So, you know, don't comment on how gross something is. Second of all, it's just a finger prick. Like, if you want to see something more, you can watch me give myself an injection or change my pump. Like, calm down. And third of all, I'm going to do what I need to do to survive. And if that means having to check my blood sugar at the table, I'm going to do it. And you know what? 100% of my friends now, none of them care. And that's because it's taken, you know, the trial and error. And I'm not saying just to cut people out of your life based on their first reaction, because it is a learning process. Absolutely. But for people that are, you know, continue to make you feel shameful about your disease, like over long periods of time, that is something that is a huge red flag that I wish I'd thought of more, you know, in my earlier life.
Absolutely. We've all, I think, that hit a nerve with me, because you're right. I've definitely interacted with people that kind of say like, ew, or gross, or like, ugh, you know, I could never. And I think we all get comments like that here and there. But again, this is like consistent patterns that you might notice in someone. So like Emily said, we're not suggesting that, you know, one bad comment from a friend means you gotta cut them out. Like, absolutely not. It's a learning curve for everyone. But again, it's about the consistency. It's about the patterns that you are identifying in these relationships. And when things become a pattern of not feeling good with someone, that's when you kind of say, okay, maybe this relationship is not what I really need it to be.
Yeah, I think, kind of continuing this ongoing rant about, or maybe not rant, but rant about this, it can also be for those of you that are listening that were diagnosed maybe later in life or during, your formative years.
Primitive years.
They are primitive. Your formative years where you can recall having friendships change based on when you were diagnosed. Like, that's real. The person that I was before I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes is not the same person I am. And for better or worse, like, do I wish I didn't have a chronic illness? All the freaking time. But at the end of the day, I know that this is what I have to do to survive, and it's just, the sooner I accepted it, the better. But if those around me couldn't accept it and couldn't cope with who I became after that diagnosis, then that led to toxic friendships. And unfortunately, that happens, especially when you're diagnosed at an older age, because you made all these really great friends, but then something radical happened in your life, and you've had to cope with it in your own way. And if they can't handle the way that you're coping with it, it's, and you're not coping with it in a really toxic way, then, or I should say, what's the word? Maybe not toxic, but like, maybe not negative, harmful, in a harmful way, then, that's knowledge. And that knowledge leads to making the decisions. It's not that knowledge is your friend's toxic. It's another cog in the machine to figure out what works for you.
Yeah.
So I think that when I think of toxic friendships, I usually think of like high schooler Miriam.
Sorry, I dropped something.
LOL.
Move on.
Okay, we're moving on. Everything's fine. Miriam's thriving, guys. But okay, this kind of helps us move on, though. Thank you for that.
Yes. Well, I was thinking of like other things that, in terms of like putting up boundaries again for those people that are harder to remove. And when I was thinking about this, like the first thing that came to mind is when you're hanging out in a group setting, right? And let's say you're going for a long walk, or you might not have like, maybe you don't have dinner plans set up or brunch plans set up. So you're walking and browsing and shopping, whatever, and kind of on a mission or to find something, who knows, and your blood sugar's low, right? And hey guys, I need to stop walking for a bit. My blood sugar's low. I just need a minute. And if people are like, no, we got to keep going. This is an example of a time you have to put a boundary up and say, no, I need to sit. If you guys want to press on, by all means press on, but I will be stopping because this is something I need to take care of. And so that is an example of putting up a boundary, right? Of there's only so much I am willing to do to stay with the group, right? I need to prioritize my health. And so this is something I'm doing for myself, and I will catch up with you guys later. I don't know if this was a realistic example or not. I think it could be. I was kind of like feeling, it felt familiar to me. And so
We've
maybe
all
you
had
guys have
situations similar to that, whether it's like explicitly someone like, no, you need to keep going, versus like, I don't want to wait for you. I can't take literally 3 or 4 minutes for you to have a glucose tab, whatever.
Yes. And I think that's a good point. It rarely is so explicit. It's rarely someone saying, no, we can't wait for you, but it might feel implied in other ways, non-verbally. I think there are other ways it comes across.
Right. It's more like someone can't do the bare minimum to make you, to like, they won't bend the bare minimum when you've bent a lot.
Yes.
And I think that's kind of like the easier way to look at it, because, and again, it's hard because unless you communicate that these things are your boundaries, that you need to take that time, you can't really, you can be annoyed and frustrated, but you can't expect people to read your mind.
Exactly.
So if that behavior doesn't change after you've spoken about it, then that to me is the biggest red flag of any kind of toxic friendship, or friendship that's not serving you anymore. Because you do need to give people a chance, unless they're doing something extremely harmful or, really straight up making your life miserable, because no one's forcing you to be a friend. If they are, that's probably your family member, and that's a whole other subject. So,
but it's true. I think it's a very good reminder for people that people can't read your mind, right? And they can't read your passive aggressive sighs or the hints that you think you're giving. Like, that's not effective ways of communicating your needs. You might have friends that are very in tune with those things, and it does seem to work for you. But I am a strong, and I can't even think of the word, a proponent of speaking your mind clearly, or speaking your needs clearly. So there's no ambiguity of like, I need to stop to do this. I need 5 minutes to kind of let my blood sugar stabilize. I need X, Y, or Z, whatever it is.
Fill in the blank. That's
fill in the blank.
This is the stop before deciding something's necessarily toxic.
Yeah.
Friendship wise. So fill in the blank. Tell people what you need. And if they can't accommodate or at the very least accept what you need, then that leads me to our next thing. What are some helpful ways to set up discussing a toxic friendship? I think something that, aside from ghosting, because I'm not really a believer in ghosting, if you need to continue seeing someone in a social setting, maybe just say, hey, this friendship, I haven't been feeling the greatest after X, Y, and Z. It's not really serving me anymore. And I definitely still want us, to be cordial. And, I don't have any ill will towards you, but I need to put myself first. And, like I'm sure you're doing, I need to think about myself and my feelings. Because what are they going to say to that? F you, you're thinking about your feelings?
Well, this is interesting because I think this is one of the places where I don't necessarily agree.
Tell me the licensed perspective.
I don't know if there is no like clear cut, guide to this, but I think that conversation in theory, right, makes sense. It's everything I usually support, speaking your mind, being clearly confronting things.
But it's not going to be received that way.
I think in reality, you're not you, Emily, but like the general you're not going to be able to communicate it in that way, and people aren't going to receive it in that way. And I think it actually could end up leading to more conflict.
Yeah.
And so I think this is one of those circumstances that, depending on the relationship, depending on the mutual friends, depending on the dynamic of the friend group, whatever it is, that you can kind of slowly ghost.
Yeah.
I think what tends to happen is someone will reach out like, hey, I've noticed we haven't talked in a while. Is something up? Like, that's a different conversation, because then you can bring it up. Like, yeah, I've kind of been distancing myself. I've kind of just been prioritizing my own needs. This is what I needed to do for me, whatever, but I
don't seek it out necessarily. It's just there's ways
and don't. I don't know. I don't want to say don't do that either. Like, I don't want to say don't confront it.
I mean, it's a case-by-case basis.
I think it's a case-by-case basis. And you will have a sense, if you've been dealing with this person and you kind of know how they are and you know how they make you feel, I think you'll have a sense of how to best handle it, or kind of what their reaction might be and how you want to deal with it.
I honestly was just thinking about that instance in college, and like I fully was like, yeah, no, this isn't working out for me anymore.
Did you confront it?
Yeah, because I had to keep seeing them. They lived in my dorm, so everyone would continue to hang out all the time, but I just felt like absolute crap after every time. And it's like, I didn't want to not have any friends, I wanted to, because it was my freshman year. What was I going to do? Like, I did make new friends and I started to feel better, what have you. But I think, and it wasn't an instance like where I just brought it up. I didn't seek her out. Like, it was like, this just
did kind of come out naturally.
Yeah, it just came up naturally. It's like, oh yeah, I haven't. It's not like, oh, why haven't I seen you in a while? It's like, yeah, I haven't seen you around, like, or something like that. Like, why weren't you here? X, Y, and Z. And it's like, well, let me count the ways. But to each their own, and nothing needs to be dramatic.
It doesn't need to be dramatic. And I think if it's what was I trying to say? Like, if it's a group dynamic, a group of friends, it might feel helpful to tell some of your mutual friends, just explaining, if you want to tell the mutual friends, I'm distancing myself a little bit from this because I find I don't feel good after I see this person. I think that's totally appropriate. And again, not dragging them into the drama, but just sort of saying, this actually quite the opposite. This is pretty drama free. Like, I'm not trying to start a fight. I'm not trying to start like group drama. I'm just saying, me personally, I'm going to sort of remove myself from this situation because I don't feel good in this situation. And that might alleviate some of your anxiety, you know, about the group dynamic and about, you know, what are my friends going to think and what about this and what about that?
For sure. So you heard it here. Miriam's great advice. But yeah, I think that kind of really wraps up this long-winded episode. I hope that this was helpful. Maybe it was, you know, it allowed some reflection on the relationships in your life, and hopefully this helps everyone get to a place where they are truly, their cup is full in every aspect, and that you know, really consider the people in your life that make you feel less than because of your disease or whatever reason it may be, because we deal with a lot, and this could be for any human being, you know, like it doesn't just have to be for diabetics, but life is hard, and you don't need to keep adding things to your plate. So if lightening the load in terms of maybe one person, or maybe even cutting back on hours you're with that one person, whatever you need to do to get you to feel happy and a little bit lighter at the end of the day, then this is us telling you and giving you permission, not that you need ours, but to do you, because everyone else is doing them.
Amen.
Anywho, yeah, whether I walk the talk is a whole other story, but here we are. So guys, follow us on Instagram. We're going to get better about posting. Like we said before, life's been really a whirlwind lately, but follow us at pancreas_pals on Instagram. Follow us on Facebook, Pancreas Pals PP. Slide into our email, pancreaspals123@gmail.com. We love hearing from you guys, whether that's DMs, emails, especially if you want to tell us any of your toxic friendship stories, hit us up. We will be back with, I think, one more episode before the end of the season, and with more content for you guys. But just know that we're always here. We're always a DM away. And oh, by the way, thank you guys so much for the tons of DMs I got about my this is Emily speaking, about my latest Dexcom mystery. It happened to Miriam before too. It's happened to quite a lot of you. It was a story, so now it's disappeared, so I'm probably just confusing everyone now. But basically, thank you all for the amazing support and community that we have. So on that note, I'm going to stop talking. Have a great week, everyone.
Bye,
Lots
guys.
of love and good shucks. Bye.
Yes.